The slap echoed louder than the roar of the engines. For a split second, everything inside the private jet froze, the air, the whispers, even the steady hum that usually comforted nervous travelers. The man in the gray hoodie didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't even blink as the flight attendant's hand dropped from his face. Her words hung heavier than the impact. Trash. And just like that, in front of a cabin full of watching eyes, a quiet man became a spectacle. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that people are more than what they seem, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. His name was Marcus Hale, though no one on that flight knew it. To them, he was just another passenger who didn't belong in a luxury cabin, someone whose worn hoodie and tired eyes didn't match the polished leather seats and champagne glasses. He had boarded last, quietly, almost apologetically, clutching a simple backpack like it carried his entire world. Maybe it did. The flight attendant, Claire Weston, had noticed him the moment he stepped in. 14 years in the industry had trained her to read people quickly. She had built her career on precision, professionalism, and control. She prided herself on maintaining the airline's elite image, ensuring that every passenger matched the standard of luxury they promised. And Marcus, in her eyes, was a disruption. At first, it was subtle. Her tight smile, the way she avoided eye contact, the clipped tone when she directed him to his seat. But tension builds like a quiet storm, and sometimes all it takes is one spark. It happened when Marcus reached into his bag for a bottle of water he had brought with him. A simple act, but Claire saw it as a violation of policy, or maybe something deeper, something unspoken. Her voice rose sharply, cutting through the calm cabin. Heads turned. Marcus tried to explain, his tone calm, respectful, almost too gentle for the situation. But explanations often lose their power when judgment has already taken root. The confrontation escalated faster than anyone expected. Words sharpened, pride flared, and then before logic could intervene, her hand struck his face. Silence followed. Marcus didn't retaliate. He didn't argue. He didn't even touch his cheek. Instead, he looked at her with something far more unsettling than anger, disappointment. Not the kind that shouts or demands justice. The kind that quietly reflects back a person's own actions like a mirror they never wanted to face. The rest of the flight passed in a tense, suffocating quiet. Passengers avoided eye contact. Some whispered. Some pretended nothing had happened. Claire continued, her duties, her movements stiff, her confidence shaken in ways she couldn't quite admit. Marcus sat still, staring out the window as clouds drifted beneath them, his thoughts somewhere far beyond the sky. When the plane landed, life seemed to resume as if nothing had happened. But some moments don't end when they're over, they begin there. Within hours, the incident had spread beyond the cabin. A passenger had recorded everything. The video was shaky, imperfect, but clear enough to show the truth. By the time Claire reached her apartment that evening, her phone was buzzing relentlessly. Notifications flooded in, messages from colleagues, missed calls from management, and a storm brewing online that she hadn't yet fully understood. First, she told herself it was exaggerated. People overreacted all the time. The internet thrived on outrage. She had been doing her job. Maintaining standards. Enforcing rules. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered something else. By midnight, the video had gone viral. Millions had watched it. Thousands had commented. And the narrative was painfully clear. A woman in uniform representing authority had publicly humiliated and struck a man who had done nothing to deserve it. Claire barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face again. Not angry, not defensive. Just steady. That quiet disappointment lingered like a shadow she couldn't escape. The next morning, she was called into the airline's headquarters. The room felt colder than usual, despite the warm sunlight filtering through the tall windows. Her supervisor sat across from her, expression carefully neutral, though the tension in his posture betrayed the gravity of the situation. Beside him, a representative from Human Resources scrolled through documents on a tablet. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. 14 years of service, hundreds of flights, countless hours spent ensuring passengers felt safe and valued. All of it weighed against one moment, one decision. Claire tried to explain. She spoke about policy, about maintaining standards, about the pressures of the job. But even as she spoke, the words sounded hollow to her own ears because the truth wasn't in the policies. It was in the video. 24 hours after the slap, Claire Weston's career ended. Just like that. No dramatic exit. No second chance meeting. Just a quiet acknowledgement that some actions carry consequences that can't be undone. As she walked out of the building, the world felt unfamiliar. The routine she had known for over a decade had vanished overnight. The identity she had built, disciplined, respected, and control, crumbled into uncertainty. And for the first time, she had to face herself without the uniform. Meanwhile, Marcus's life continued, at least on the surface. But his story was far from simple. What no one on that flight knew was that Marcus had spent years building something quietly, away from attention and recognition. He wasn't a man defined by appearances. He was a man defined by resilience. A decade earlier, he had lost everything. His business had collapsed, his savings drained, his confidence shattered. He had spent years rebuilding not just financially, but emotionally, piece by piece, day by day, learning humility, learning patience, learning the quiet strength of starting over. The hoodie he wore wasn't a sign of failure. It was a reminder of where he had been. And the flight he had taken wasn't a luxury indulgence. It was a step toward something new. When the video reached him, Marcus watched it once. He didn't replay it. He didn't dwell on it. Because for him, the moment wasn't about humiliation. It was about understanding. He saw a woman overwhelmed by pressure, reacting from a place of judgment and fear. He saw himself years ago, when life had hardened him in ways he hadn't fully understood. And he made a decision, not out of revenge, but out of something far more powerful: compassion. A few days later, Claire received an unexpected message. It wasn't from the airline. It wasn't from a journalist or a critic. It was from Marcus. The message was simple. No anger, no accusation. Just an invitation to meet. At first, she hesitated. Pride and shame battled within her. But curiosity and perhaps a need for closure won. They met in a quiet cafe, far from cameras and headlines. Claire expected confrontation. She expected resentment. Instead, she found calm. Marcus spoke gently, not to lecture, but to share. He told her about his past, about the years he had spent rebuilding himself, about the lessons he had learned along the way. He spoke about how easy it is to judge, how quick people are to define others by a single moment or appearance. And then he said something that stayed with her long after they parted. He told her that losing everything isn't the end. It's an invitation to become someone new. Claire listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in years. And in that moment, something shifted within her. The loss of her career no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a turning point. Over the following weeks, Claire began to rebuild, not her reputation, not her career, but herself. She volunteered at community centers. She worked with organizations that helped people facing hardship. She learned to listen without judgment, to see beyond appearances. It wasn't easy. Growth rarely is. But slowly, quietly, she became someone different. Not perfect, but better. Marcus, in his own way, continued forward as well. He expanded his work, focusing on creating opportunities for others who had faced setbacks. His journey wasn't about success in the traditional sense. It was about impact. Two lives, once intersecting in a moment of pain, had transformed in ways neither could have predicted. And that's the strange, beautiful thing about life. Sometimes the moments that break us are the very ones that shape us into something stronger. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that change is always possible, no matter how far we've fallen. And before we end, here's something special. Comment below with the word "a second chance" if you believe people can grow beyond their worst moments. Because in the end, it's not about the mistakes we make. It's about what we choose to become after them. The cafe meeting should have been the end of the story, but life rarely wraps itself up so neatly. For Claire Weston, the days after meeting Marcus didn't magically erase the weight she carried. They made it heavier, but clearer. Because now she couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. She had seen firsthand the humanity of the man she had reduced to a label. And once you truly see someone, you can't unsee them. The world, however, wasn't as forgiving. The video still circulated online, replayed in loops, dissected in comment sections, turned into headlines and reaction clips. Strangers who had never met her felt entitled to define her entirely by that one moment. To them, she wasn't a person who made a mistake. She was the mistake. Every job application she sent seemed to vanish into silence. Interviews that started promising ended abruptly when her name was recognized. Doors closed before she even reached them. For the first time in her life, Claire understood what it meant to be judged without context. There were nights she sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the walls, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. 14 years of discipline reduced to a viral clip. It felt unfair. It felt cruel. But deep down, she knew something even harder to accept. It was also real. Growth doesn't come from denying consequences. It comes from facing. So instead of running from it, Claire made a decision that terrified her. She leaned into it. She began volunteering more consistently, not as a way to repair her image, but as a way to repair her perspective. She worked with people she might have once overlooked, people struggling with homelessness, unemployment, addiction, loss, and every story she heard chipped away at the rigid worldview she once held so tightly. One afternoon, while helping distribute meals at a shelter, she met a teenage boy named Elias. He was quiet, withdrawn, with eyes that carried more weight than his years should allow. At first, he barely spoke, keeping his distance like the world had taught him to expect rejection. Something about him stayed with Claire. Maybe it was the way he reminded her of Marcus, the quiet strength, the unspoken story. Or maybe it was the way he reminded her of herself before she had learned to hide behind control and judgment. Over time, she approached him gently. No pressure, no expectations, just presence. Slowly, he began to open up. His story wasn't unique, but that's what made it heartbreaking. A broken home, missed opportunities, a system that had failed him in ways too complex to untangle. He had learned early on that people often saw him as a problem before they ever saw him as a person. Claire listened, not as someone trying to fix him, but as someone finally learning how to understand. And in those moments, something profound began to happen. The more she helped others feel seen, the more she began to see herself clearly, not as the person she had been judged to be, but as someone capable of change. Meanwhile, Marcus watched from a distance, not in a controlling or intrusive way, but with quiet awareness. He had stayed loosely connected to Claire after their meeting, exchanging occasional messages, checking in without imposing. He believed in giving people space to grow, but he also believed in being present when it mattered, and he could see the difference. One evening, weeks after their first meeting, Claire received another message from him. This time, it wasn't just an invitation to talk. It was an opportunity. Marcus had been working on something for years, a foundation focused on helping people rebuild their lives after major setbacks. Not just financially, but emotionally and socially. He had seen too many people fall through the cracks, defined forever by their lowest moments. He wanted to change that. And now, he saw in Claire someone who understood that pain firsthand. When she read his message, her first reaction was disbelief, then hesitation, then fear. Why would he trust her after everything? But Marcus wasn't offering trust blindly. He was offering it intentionally. Because he believed something most people overlook, that people who have faced consequences deeply are often the ones who understand change the most. Their next meeting felt different. Not like closure, like a beginning. Marcus spoke about his vision, about creating programs that didn't just provide resources but restored dignity. He talked about mentorship, education, second chances, not as charity, but as investment. And then he said something that caught Claire completely off guard. He wanted her to be part of it. Not as a symbol, not as a redemption story, but as someone who could contribute. Claire didn't answer immediately. Because this wasn't just an opportunity, it was a responsibility. To step into a role where her past wouldn't disappear but would become part of the foundation she was helping build. Days passed before she responded, but when she did, her answer was simple. Yes, the transition wasn't easy. Working with Marcus meant stepping into a world that demanded vulnerability, patience, and consistency. It meant facing people who carried pain far deeper than her own. It meant proving, not to others but to herself, that she could be more than the worst thing she had done. There were moments of doubt, moments where the weight of her past felt too heavy to carry forward. But each time she remembered something Marcus had told her. That growth isn't about erasing who you were. It's about choosing who you become next. Months turned into a year. The foundation grew. Lives changed. Elias, the quiet boy from the shelter, became one of the first success stories. With guidance, support, and someone who believed in him, he began to rebuild his path. Education, stability, confidence, things that once felt out of reach slowly became possible. And Claire was there for every step, not as a savior, but as someone who understood the power of being seen. The world outside hadn't completely forgotten her past. There were still whispers, still judgments, still moments where her name carried echoes of that one incident. But something had shifted. Those echoes no longer defined her, because her actions now spoke louder. And then, almost exactly 1 year after the incident, something unexpected happened. A new video began to circulate, not of a slap, but of a moment. It showed Claire standing beside Elias at a small ceremony where he was being recognized for his achievements. There was no spotlight on her, no dramatic narration, just a quiet image of a woman standing beside a young man, both smiling, not because life had been easy, but because they had made it through something difficult. The comments this time were different, not all of them, but enough. People saw more than the past. They saw change, they saw effort, they saw humanity. And maybe, just maybe, they saw themselves. If this part of the story touched your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share. You never know who might need a reminder that it's never too late to start again.